The Grand Council chamber of the Galactic Coalition was about as welcoming as a dentist's drill. Cold, metallic, and utterly devoid of any comfort, much like the aliens who frequented it. A perfect place to decide the fate of the universe, or, in today's case, Earth. Ambassador Rhinox, a human so sharply dressed he could cut glass, sat at one of the elongated tables, surrounded by an array of glowering extraterrestrial representatives. His suit was immaculate, though his expression was less so, a mix of grim determination and a healthy dose of irritation, like a man who just found out he'd have to buy another round. "So you're telling me," Rhinox said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "that the wormhole collapsed because someone forgot to pay the cosmic toll." The representative of the Zorvax collective, whose face resembled a particularly unhappy squid, glared at him with what might have been contempt or possibly just indigestion. "It was an unforeseen gravitational anomaly," it gurgled. "Unfortunate, but not our responsibility." Rhinox leaned back in his chair, folding his arms as if to say, "Oh, spare me your bureaucratic nonsense. Let me get this straight. Earth, my lovely little blue rock, is now cut off from the rest of the galaxy, and all you can offer is a shrug and a not my problem." The representative of the Jorvian hegemony, a creature with a physique reminiscent of a walking cactus, chimed in. "The coalition cannot be held accountable for every spatial hiccup." "Spatial hiccup," Rhinox echoed, his tone a masterclass in sardonic disbelief. "When I spill my coffee, that's a hiccup. When a wormhole collapses and strands billions of people, that's a damn catastrophe." The chamber filled with a low murmur, like the distant hum of a disgruntled mob. Rhinox knew the drill. These creatures were more interested in political chess than in real issues. He needed to hit them where it hurt, right in the pride. "Look," Rhinox continued, his voice now softer but with a razor's edge, "Earth might not be the center of the universe, though we like to think it is, but we're still an important outpost. If trade routes collapse, the entire power balance shifts. I bet your superiors would love explaining that to their citizens." The Zorvax seemed to mull this over, though it could just as well have been digesting lunch. "What exactly do you propose, Ambassador?" Rhinox suppressed a grin. "I propose we stop twiddling our tentacle equivalents and do something. Mobilize your fleets, allocate resources, whatever it takes to stabilize that wormhole. Otherwise, we might all be dealing with a universe where humans are the least of your worries." The Vornaxian delegate, a creature resembling an oversized hawk with a notorious reputation for politicking, finally spoke, its voice like gravel in a blender. "And what assurance do we have that this isn't a ploy by Earth to gain more influence?" Rhinox chuckled, a sound void of any real amusement. "Trust me, if Earth had this kind of power, I'd be retiring to a beach somewhere, not stuck here trying to coax cooperation out of you lovely folks." Somewhere in the back, a coalition aide snorted, quickly stifling it into a cough. The tension in the room was a living thing, twitching with each exchange. If Rhinox didn't convince them soon, Earth would be as forgotten as yesterday's lunch special. "There are rumors," the Jorvian delegate interjected, "that human technology is advancing at an unprecedented rate." "Rumors," Rhinox said with a dismissive wave, "are like space debris, mostly junk, with the rare piece worth salvaging. Besides, you give us too much credit. We're still figuring out how to make decent decaf." The chamber's atmosphere shifted, a subtle blend of frustration, skepticism, and something bordering on reluctant amusement. Rhinox capitalized on it. "Let's be honest here, folks. We're all in the same boat or spacecraft or whatever. An isolated Earth means instability for all of us. We either work together or we start stockpiling canned goods for the inevitable chaos." The Vornaxian shifted uncomfortably, its feathers ruffling like an old lady's hat in a gust. It didn't like the idea, but it couldn't argue with the logic. "What exactly do you need from this council, Ambassador?" Rhinox sighed as if all the burdens of the universe rested on his well-tailored shoulders. I need ships, experts, and resources, and I need them yesterday. You help us fix the wormhole, and in return, we'll owe you one. And trust me, you never know when a favor from the folks who keep finding new ways to blow themselves up might come in handy." The Zorvax, clearly not a fan of any form of camaraderie, attempted a final protest. "This is highly irregular. So is Earth being cut off," Rhinox shot back. "But here we are." The council chamber fell silent, a rare occurrence in a place where debates usually raged until everyone forgot what they were debating about in the first place. Rhinox watched the alien representatives exchange glances, communication flowing silently across eyes, beaks, and whatever passed for facial features. Finally, the Vornaxian spoke, its voice begrudgingly resigned. "The coalition will convene to discuss your proposal, Ambassador." Rhinox gave a curt nod. "That's all I ask. Discuss away. Meanwhile, I'll be here, hoping that when I next call home, all I'll get isn't 'we're sorry. The number you have reached is no longer in service." As the delegates filed out, cloaked in their various dignities and scents, Rhinox remained seated, watching them with a rueful smile. Saving Earth from cosmic oblivion was a lot like navigating a minefield, blindfolded, and with a slight hangover. "Ambassador," came a voice from his left. It was Director Nira of the Coalition's diplomatic corps, a human as well, even more world-weary than Rhinox. "Do you think they'll actually help us?" Rhinox shrugged, an eloquent gesture that said, "Who knows? Hope for the best, prepare for the worst, and try not to get too drunk in between." Nira chuckled, though it carried the weight of someone who's seen too many burnt-out stars. "You think we'll see Earth again?" "I didn't come out here to have a lovely conversation about the weather," Rhinox replied. "If I have to, I'll tug that damn wormhole back together myself." Nira nodded, an unsaid good luck hanging between them like a specter. As Rhinox left the chamber, he felt the pressure of the universe pressing against him, like an overeager lover with bad breath. The stakes were high, higher than they'd ever been. And if there was one thing humans were good at, it was rising to the occasion, usually by accident. Outside, the corridors of the Coalition headquarters were as labyrinthine as the minds of those who worked there. Rhinox navigated them with the ease of a man who had spent more time than he'd care to admit in their cold embrace. As he rounded a corner, he nearly collided with a maintenance droid, its array of tools extending like an overcaffeinated octopus. "Watch it," Rhinox snapped, sidestepping with the grace of someone who dodged more than a few thrown objects in his time. The droid beeped apologetically, retracting its limbs. "Apologies, Ambassador Rhinox." Rhinox waved it off. "No harm done. Just another day in paradise." He found himself in his office, a cramped space filled with the detritus of a career spent trying to make sense of the senseless. Diplomatic awards, most of them meaningless, cluttered the shelves, alongside a growing collection of stress balls in various states of disintegration. Collapsing into his chair, Rhinox stared at the ceiling, contemplating the absurdity of it all. Here he was, one man against a galaxy of red tape and indifference, trying to save a planet that probably wouldn't thank him if he succeeded. But then again, that was the human way, stubborn, foolhardy, and with just enough optimism to keep banging their heads against the wall. Rhinox picked up the communicator, his fingers dancing over the controls. He needed to report back to Earth, or at least try to. As the connection fizzled into life, he was reminded of the time he had to fix his own toaster. It had been a disaster, but he'd managed to make it work eventually. With any luck, this would be no different. "This is Ambassador Rhinox calling Earth Command," he said, hoping the signal would reach anyone. "If you're hearing this, know that we're making progress. Until then, keep the lights on and don't do anything I wouldn't do." The line crackled ominously, like the opening bars of a bad symphony. But there was a hint of connection, a spark of hope. All he could do now was wait and see if it caught fire. As he sat in the dim light of his office, Rhinox couldn't help but chuckle at the absurdity of it all. The galaxy was a mad, whirling beast, and he was just one man trying to ride it without falling off. But if there was one thing humanity excelled at, it was hanging on by the skin of their teeth. For now, that would have to be enough. The Galactic Coalition Grand Council chamber had seen plenty of squabbles, but there was a different kind of electricity in the air today, like the tension before a thunderstorm. If thunderstorms had the potential to strand billions of people in cosmic isolation. Rhinox knew he had stirred the pot. He just hoped he wouldn't be the one to choke on the soup. The delegates, having shuffled out of the chamber like disgruntled penguins, were now gathered in smaller groups, muttering like a bunch of kids caught with their hands in the cookie jar. Rhinox had to suppress a smile. Nothing like a good existential crisis to bring out the best in bureaucrats. Over in the corner, the Vornaxian delegate was engaged in a heated whisper with the Zorvax representative. A creature resembling an unhappy squid, the Zorvax seemed to express its displeasure through a series of gurgles and bubbles. Not exactly musical, but it got the point across. Rhinox sidled over, the picture of casual nonchalance. "Gentlemen," he said, with the kind of cheer usually reserved for used car salesmen, "how's the backroom dealing going? Any chance we can skip to the part where you pretend to care about Earth?" The Vornaxian's feathers bristled. "Ambassador, this is hardly the time for jokes." "On the contrary," Rhinox replied with a shrug. "If there was ever a time for jokes, it's when the universe is teetering on the brink of chaos." The Zorvax emitted a noise that might have been agreement or indigestion. Hard to tell with these squid-like beings. "There are political considerations," it burbled. "The Jorvian hegemony believes aiding Earth could set a precedent." "Sure," Rhinox said. "Can't have the galaxy thinking we're, God forbid, helpful." The Vornaxian leaned in, its voice a conspiratorial blend of gravel and disdain. "The Coalition's resources are stretched thin. The hegemony believes the incident with Earth is an Earth problem. They suggest your technology might have caused the collapse." Rhinox raised an eyebrow. "Right, because we're just that good. Next, you'll tell me we engineered black holes as a hobby. There's talk of delaying any decision until more evidence is gathered," the Vornaxian continued, ignoring the sarcasm. "Perfect," Rhinox snorted. "Maybe while we're at it, we can wait until hell freezes over and pigs start doing aerial maneuvers." The delegates exchanged a glance. The universal sign for this human is insufferable but might have a point. Before they could respond, a small device on the Vornaxian's belt chirped. It was the unmistakable sound of a message that would likely complicate things further. Meanwhile, on the other side of the galaxy, Earth was hardly faring better. The situation back home was like a bad comedy sketch. Everyone knew their lines, but the punchline was nowhere to be found. In a dimly lit lab buried within the bowels of Earth's supposedly advanced science complex, Dr. Eliana Morrow was about ready to throw the universe's biggest hissy fit. The communication setup in front of her was a tangled mess of wires, screens, and blinking lights that might as well have been decorated for a particularly deranged Christmas. "Why does it feel like I'm trying to talk to the Martians with 2 tin cans and a string?" she grumbled, elbow deep in technology that would have given any sane engineer nightmares. Her assistant, a fresh-faced kid who still had some of his idealism left, peered over her shoulder. "Do you think it's even working, Dr. Morrow?" She let out a weary sigh. "If by working you mean making my life a living hell, then yes, it's working perfectly." There was a crackle from the speakers, followed by a burst of static that made Eliana wince. She smacked the console with the palm of her hand, a technique refined through years of stubborn electronics. "This is Dr. Morrow, attempting contact with Ambassador Rhinox," she said, her voice echoing into the ether. "If you're receiving this, know that Earth is in quite the pickle and could really use some good news for a change." The line buzzed ominously, like a swarm of bees with social anxiety. Eliana crossed her fingers, a gesture as futile as it was hopeful. Back in the Coalition corridors, Rhinox's communicator buzzed to life. He nearly jumped out of his skin, not expecting anything but silence. The static cleared just enough for him to hear Eliana's voice, crackled but unmistakably hers. "Dr. Morrow," he said, pressing the device to his ear as if it might help. "This is Rhinox. What's the status back there?" Aliana's response was fraught with interference, but the desperation was clear as day. "Rhinox, we're barely holding things together. Supplies are tight and morale's tighter. If we don't get that wormhole stable, we're looking at a planet-wide panic. I mean more than usual." Rhinox cursed under his breath. "Hang tight, Aliana, we're working on it from this end. Just make sure nobody decides to declare themselves king while I'm away, yeah." Aliana's laugh was bitter, like cheap coffee. "I'll do my best, but you know humans, give them a crisis and they start measuring crowns." The line faded into static once more, leaving Rhinox staring at the communicator like it had personally offended him. He slipped it back into his pocket, determination hardening in his gut. The coalition might be playing their political games, but Earth didn't have the luxury of time. Rhinox headed down the corridor, his mind a maze of strategies and contingencies. He needed to get back to the council chamber, needed to keep the pressure on. He couldn't let the delegates get too cozy in their indecision, not when so much was at stake. He arrived just in time to see the delegates returning from their huddles, expressions set like stone. The Jorvian delegate, the walking cactus himself, took the floor first. "Ambassador Rhinox, the coalition has agreed to form a committee to investigate the wormhole incident." Rhinox rolled his eyes, the motion almost theatrical. "A committee? Great. Because what we really need right now is more meetings." The Zorvax gurgled discontentedly. "Committees are how we ensure thorough examination of the facts. Committees are how we ensure absolutely nothing gets done," Rhinox shot back. "Look, Earth needs help, not red tape. We've got scientists working around the clock in conditions fit for a reality TV show. If we wait for your committee's findings, we'll be lucky if we have a planet left to save." His words hung in the air like a challenge, one the delegates couldn't easily dismiss. The Vornaxian shifted its weight from one clawed foot to another, clearly uncomfortable with the human's bluntness, but unable to refute the urgency. "If Earth truly is as advanced as rumored," the Jorvian said, not without suspicion, "perhaps you should be able to mend this rift yourselves." Rhinox laughed, a harsh, biting sound. "Advanced? We're about as advanced as a monkey with a wrench half the time. We can barely decide what color to paint our walls, let alone fix a collapsed wormhole on our own." The Jorvian's spines quivered, a sign of either agreement or irritation. "The coalition is wary of rushing into a situation fraught with unknowns." "Right," Rhinox said, his words dripping with sarcasm. "Because waiting for all the facts has always worked out so well for us. Just ask the dinosaurs." The tension in the room was a living thing, pulsing and shifting as if it might explode at any moment. Rhinox could feel the pressure, knew the odds were stacked against him. But if there was one thing he thrived on, it was the impossible. "Listen," he said, his voice lowering to a growl that demanded attention. "We can sit here and debate until the stars burn out, or we can act. Help us stabilize that wormhole and you'll be doing more than just saving Earth. You'll be preventing a domino effect that could shake the entire galaxy. Your choice." Silence fell, heavy and uncertain. Rhinox could almost see the cogs turning in their alien minds, the calculations and the risks. When the Vornaxian finally spoke, its tone was reluctant, but there was a hint of resolve. "We will consider immediate action, but there will be conditions." "Of course there will be," Rhinox said, a weary humor in his voice. "Name your price." As the delegates began to outline their terms, some reasonable, others laughable, Rhinox allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. It wasn't a victory, not yet, but it was a step. And in a universe that seemed determined to grind him down, that was enough to keep him fighting. Back on Earth, Aliana watched as the communication systems flickered back to life, a tenuous connection forming like a thread of hope in the vastness of uncertainty. She leaned closer, the screen reflecting in her eyes, determination etched into every line of her face. "Come on, Rhinox," she murmured to herself, her voice a mix of plea and demand. Don't let us down. Because if there was one thing Earth had learned over millennia of chaos and conflict, it was that when the chips were down, you never gave up on a good fight, even if the universe seemed hell-bent on throwing everything it had to keep you from winning. For now, both Rhinox and Aliana had to hold onto that stubborn, foolhardy human spirit. It was all they had, but sometimes, just sometimes, it was exactly what they needed to defy the odds and come out swinging. Rhinox had barely stepped out of the council chamber when he was accosted by a small, insectoid creature whose exoskeleton seemed to be held together mostly by ambition and cheap polish. Ambassador Rhinox, it buzzed, in a tone that suggested it thought itself important. A word, if you will. Can't promise it'll be a polite one, Rhinox replied, but he slowed his pace, waiting for the creature to catch up. It did so with the kind of eagerness that belonged in a motivational seminar, not among diplomats who usually preferred their enthusiasm like their drinks, on ice. There's concern among certain factions, the bug said, its antennae twitching like someone in dire need of a caffeine fix. That Earth's isolation presents opportunities. Rhinox raised an eyebrow. Opportunities. Is that what we're calling screwing people over these days? Competitive advantages, the insect insisted, with the kind of optimism that could only come from a creature whose idea of a bad day involved getting stuck in a discarded soda can. He sighed. Look, whatever scheming's going on, let me make this clear. Earth's not a buffet for you to pick at. We might be in a jam, but we're not toast yet. The insect buzzed disapprovingly. The Zorvacs are planning a move. If Earth remains cut off, they could leverage their trade routes to— Trade routes, Rhinox interrupted. Always about who gets the biggest piece of pie. You ever think maybe we should bake another pie instead? I don't understand the metaphor, the insect admitted. Neither do I, Rhinox said, rubbing his temples. Look, just tell your bosses that if they try anything funny, I'll do more than laugh. The insect buzzed away, leaving Rhinox to stew in his own annoyance. He knew the galaxy's politics were murky at the best of times, but this was just taking the piss. If the coalition couldn't get their act together, Earth would be left dangling like a worm on a hook, ripe for exploitation. Lovely. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Dr. Aliana Morrow was knee-deep in what she jokingly referred to as Plan B for bonkers. The idea was simple in the way only fundamentally stupid ideas could be. She'd use biotechnological innovation to stabilize a temporary communication link, effectively jury-rigging a cosmic walkie-talkie. Her assistant, who'd finally learned to stop wearing his optimism on his sleeve, watched her work with a blend of admiration and confusion. So, this plan, he said, trying to sound casual. It's not going to blow us all to bits, right? Let's put it this way, Aliana replied, not looking up from her work. If it does, at least we won't have to worry about the wormhole anymore, he chuckled nervously. Comforting. She was in the midst of connecting a particularly stubborn biocircuit when the lab's lights flickered ominously. Oh, come on, she muttered, giving the nearest piece of machinery a swift kick. Don't you dare die on me now. There was a moment of tense silence before the light steadied. That's the spirit, she said, patting the console as if it were a particularly temperamental pet. With the device nearly ready, she turned to her assistant. All right, start the sequence. Let's see if we can shout into the void and actually get a response. The young man hesitated, fingers hovering over the controls. And if it doesn't work, Aliana shrugged. Then we find a bigger hammer. While Earth was busy trying to patch up a technological hole with duct tape and dreams, Rhinox was back in the Coalition's labyrinthine corridors, trying to unpick the threads of whatever scheme was unfolding. He cornered a Jorvian delegate, one of the few who didn't immediately glare daggers at him, and got straight to the point. What's the word on the Zorvacs? Rhinox asked, keeping his tone light but his eyes sharp. The Jorvian, whose skin resembled a particularly prickly plant, looked around furtively. They're positioning for control over the new trade routes. They think Earth's isolation gives them leverage. Of course they do, he muttered. Because helping a planet in crisis is clearly not as profitable as exploiting one. The Jorvian's spines bristled. You humans are a curious breed, so quick to sarcasm. It's either that or cry, Rhinox replied. And I left my tissues back on Earth. With a nod that might have been respect or resignation, the Jorvian continued. There's more, rumors of a technology they are interested in. Something Earth was developing. Rhinox felt a chill run through him, though he fought to keep his voice steady. What kind of technology? The answer was disconcertingly vague. Something transformative. Of course, Rhinox said, his voice dry as the deserts of Mars. The universe is falling apart and someone's after our toys. Back on Earth, Aliana was about to test her makeshift setup. The lab buzzed with the kind of quiet tension usually reserved for bomb squads. She looked at her assistant, offering a reassuring nod, though whether it was for his benefit or her own, she wasn't sure. All right, she said, flicking switches with practiced confidence. Let's dial the universe. The machine hummed to life, the biocircuits glowing with an eerie, organic light. There was a crackle, a hiss, and then, miraculously, a voice. Liana, Dr. Morrow, do you read? Her heart skipped a beat. Rhinox, is that you? She shouted, almost not believing her ears. Yeah, it's me, came the tinny, distant reply. What's the situation back home? She let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. About as stable as a one-legged stool, but we're managing. Your end? Aliens playing Monopoly with our planet as the board, Rhinox said with a sardonic edge. We're on it, though. Aliana's voice was firm. We need that wormhole back, Rhinox. We've got scientists ready to tackle it given half a chance. Understood. We're trying to unfurl the political spaghetti here, he replied. Sit tight. And by the way, your plan B worked. The line crackled again, but for a moment, hope surged through the lab like a shot of adrenaline. Aliana exchanged a glance with her assistant, who looked like he might burst with excitement, but she knew better than to celebrate prematurely. Keep it together, she said, more to herself than anyone else. We're not out of the woods yet. Meanwhile, Rhinox was back in the Coalition's own twisted version of diplomacy, which resembled a snake pit where the snakes wore suits and spoke in committees. He needed allies and fast. The Zorvax's interest in Earth's technology was a red flag, and not the decorative kind. He found his way to the Vornaxian delegate, who was carefully inspecting a plant in the corridor, a plant that was somehow managing to look more alive than half the bureaucrats in the building. Got a minute? Rhinox asked, and because he'd finally learned some decorum, he added, please. The Vornaxian turned its feathered head, its expression unreadable. Ambassador Rhinox. How can I assist you? I need to know what the Zorvax are really after. Word is they're sniffing around some Earth tech. The alien's eyes glittered like obsidian. The Zorvax are interested in many things. Your planet's situation is quite advantageous. Advantageous, Rhinox repeated, tasting the word like it might be poison. Funny, isn't it? How one species' disaster is another's opportunity. The Vornaxian made a sound that might have been a laugh. Galactic politics are never straightforward, Ambassador. No kidding. Look, we might not be shiny and advanced, but Earth's got potential. Maybe not fancy tech, but resilience. And a mean right hook. The Vornaxian seemed to consider this. Perhaps I can offer some insight. There are whispers of biotechnological advancements on Earth. The Zorvax believe it could be pivotal. Biotech, Rhinox paused, his mind racing. Well, that's a new one, and here I thought they just wanted our space tinker toys. The Vornaxian nodded, a gesture that seemed almost sympathetic. They are not the only ones with an interest. Be wary, Ambassador. Thanks for the tip, Rhinox said. I owe you one. He left the Vornaxian to its botanical musings, mind reeling with this new development. Earth's isolation was bad enough, but if their technology was indeed the target, they were in deeper trouble than he'd imagined. Back on Earth, Aliana was running through the lab like a woman possessed. With the temporary link established, she turned her attention to the bigger problem. The wormhole needed stabilizing, and they needed a solution, preferably one that didn't require sacrificing a goat under a full moon. Her assistant, who'd stopped questioning her sanity months ago, piped up. "Do we have a plan C?" Aliana paused, a half-smile on her lips. "Plan C is the fun one. We take what we know about biocircuits and apply it to the wormhole's signature. Basically, we're going to force the universe to play nice. And if it refuses," she grinned, "then we hit it with Plan D. Don't ask what it is, we're not there yet." Despite the grim situation, or maybe because of it, humor was as essential as oxygen. She needed to keep herself and the team from spiraling into despair. The galaxy might end up being their enemy, but no way in hell was she going to let it win without a fight. As Rhinox navigated the Coalition's web of half-truths and double-crosses, Aliana and her scrappy Earth team prepared for the next step in their mad plan. The path ahead was murky, fraught with potential pitfalls, but they were nothing if not hopeful. Rhinox knew he had to keep pushing forward. The Coalition's reticence was legendary, but Earth couldn't afford to be a pawn in their game. He had to make them see the stakes. The very fabric of their interconnected existence lay in the balance. "All right, you cosmic bureaucrats," he muttered to himself. "You wanted a committee. I'll give you a reason to call it an emergency." And with that, he strode back into the fray, ready to fight tooth and nail for every inch. For Earth, for Aliana's mad plans, and for a chance that the universe might let them catch a break. Just this once. The Galactic Coalition Grand Council chamber buzzed with the tension of 1,000 frenzied bees, all having a bad day. Delegates filled the room, each one looking more discontent than the last, which was no small feat given the Zorvax representatives' perpetually mopey appearance. Ambassador Rhinox found himself wedged between the Jorvian hegemon's cacti and the Vornaxian delegate's feathery aura, which was slightly less comforting than standing between a rock and a hard place. "You know," Rhinox started, glancing sideways at the Jorvian, "I've seen less prickly thickets back on Earth." The Jorvian, whose spines always seemed one snide remark away from launching, quivered slightly. "Your jests are noted, Ambassador. Just trying to lighten the mood," Rhinox replied, though the mood was as light as a lead balloon. He turned his attention to the Vornaxian. "Any new whispers from the Zorvax? Or are they still playing the world's worst-kept secret?" The Vornaxian made a sound like a coo mixed with a cough. "Their interest in your planet's technology has not waned. In fact, it grows." "Fantastic," Rhinox said, rolling his eyes. "What's next?" "They want our recipe for baked potatoes." The Vornaxian's feathers ruffled in amusement, or what passed for it. "They seek something far more transformative." "Transformative," Rhinox mused. "Everyone's favorite buzzword, right alongside synergy and robust." He sighed, glancing at the chamber's center where yet another debate raged on. The Zorvax representative was currently gesturing with a tentacle that looked suspiciously like it was flipping someone off. "Comrades of the Coalition," the Zorvax gurgled, voice bubbling like an underwater politician. "The resource strain is palpable. Why risk further destabilization by funneling aid into a planet that offers little in return?" Rhinox, who had sat through enough political hogwash to fill a landfill, knew this was his cue. He stepped forward, his expression a mask of diplomatic composure, or as close as he could get. "If I may interject," he said, as if anyone could stop him at this point, "Earth might not be the shining jewel of the galaxy, but it's not a lost cause. We've got potential." The room rippled with a mixture of dismissive grunts and genuine curiosity, a reaction he might as well patent as the Rhinox effect. "Oh, and what potential is that?" The Zorvax sneered, or at least did its best approximation of sneering. "Another species vying for more than it can handle, maybe," Rhinox admitted. "Or maybe we're the underdog who punches above its weight class. We might be isolated, but we're far from out." A murmur spread through the chamber. The Jorvian delegate, who had been eyeing Rhinox with all the warmth of a cactus in winter, suddenly looked contemplative. "Perhaps there is merit in reconsidering," it said, though whether it was talking about Earth's merits or Rhinox's nerve was anyone's guess. Meanwhile, planetside, Aliana and her ragtag band of scientists were elbow-deep in their cosmic tinkering. They had rigged up a device that looked more like a scrapyard art installation than a piece of cutting-edge technology. But appearances were deceiving, much like in-laws at a family gathering. Ready to make history or die trying, Aliana asked her assistant, who was currently trying to untangle himself from a nest of cables. Preferably the former, he replied, finally emerging with a grin that suggested he was as mad as she was. But I'm all for dramatic exits. Good. Let's give the universe a show it won't forget, Aliana said, hitting the final switch. The room thrummed with energy, a symphony of beeps, hisses, and the occasional spark, like a band warming up for the apocalypse. The device began its work, emitting pulses designed to tickle the fabric of space-time in all the right ways. Or at least that was the plan. If it didn't work, well, they might end up as stardust sooner than planned. Back in the Coalition chamber, Rhinox's impromptu speech had sparked enough interest to light a dim bulb. The Vornaxian, feathers twitching with intrigue, leaned toward him. Your planet's resilience is intriguing, but what of the Zorvax's claims to your technology? Rhinox chuckled, a sound more sardonic than joyful. They think they've got us in a bind, but we can be unpredictable. The Vornaxian's eyes glinted. Unpredictability can be a strength. Exactly, Rhinox nodded. Like trying to predict where a cat will land when thrown. Not that I'm advocating for that, he added hastily, catching the Jorvian's horrified glance. The Zorvax, meanwhile, had lowered its tentacles, clearly sensing the tide shifting. We should be cautious, it warned, though the caution was obviously intended for itself as much as for anyone else. Caution's overrated, Rhinox replied. It's for people with something to lose. Humans, the Zorvax huffed, though whether it was admiration or frustration was debatable. Always willing to gamble. We call it being optimistic, Rhinox said, or foolish depending on the day. As the council debated, Rhinox knew he needed allies, not just fence-sitters. The Jorvian delegate had shown a glimmer of support, but glimmers wouldn't cut it. He needed floodlights. Think about it, Rhinox urged, addressing the room once more. What have you got to lose? Besides, if Earth goes down, who will you blame next time things go wrong? You need us to keep things interesting. The Vornaxian, ever the diplomat, added, a world with potential is a world worth investing in. Exactly, Rhinox said, grateful for the assist. And if we're wrong, well, you can always say I told you so. The room shifted again, the atmosphere lightening ever so slightly. Maybe it was the faint promise of hope, or maybe everyone was just tired of the Zorvax's whining. Either way, Rhinox felt a crack in the Coalition's icy facade. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Aliana's device pulsated with a new rhythm, the lights casting a glow that could almost be described as hopeful if you squinted really hard. Any signs of success? Her assistant asked, a bead of sweat running down his forehead. Other than the fact we're still standing, Aliana quipped. Let's call that a work in progress. The link they'd established crackled to life again, a distant, almost inaudible voice coming through. Aliana, this is Rhinox, you there? Aliana's heart did a complicated somersault. We hear you, she shouted, hoping the universe was feeling cooperative today. Progress on our end, Rhinox said, his words distorted but understandable. Keep pushing. We're rallying support. Good, she replied, adrenaline coursing through her like a caffeinated river. We're holding up our end. Just don't let those tentacled bastards get their grubby fingers on our tech. Wouldn't dream of it, Rhinox's voice crackled back. Stay safe, Dr. Morrow. The connection faded, leaving behind a silence that felt oddly reassuring. The plan was working, even if the galaxy was doing its best impression of a soap opera. Back in the Coalition's chamber, Rhinox felt the tides turning ever so slightly. The Jorvian's prickles seemed to soften, and the Vornaxian's eyes shimmered with a hint of something that could be mistaken for hope. Ambassador Rhinox, the Jorvian finally said, its voice tinged with a respect that hadn't been there before. Perhaps we should revisit our stance on Earth's predicament. Glad to hear it, Rhinox replied with a nod. Now, how about we work together to turn this mess around? The Vornaxian nodded, feathers rustling with agreement. The universe is vast but not infinite in its patience. Let us be wise stewards. Rhinox, who was starting to feel like he might actually pull this off, grinned. Stewards, huh? Next thing you'll know, we'll be hosting tea parties. Let us hope, the Vornaxian said dryly, that your planet's resilience is as strong as its ambassador's wit. With allies slowly assembling, Rhinox felt the first stirrings of real hope. The coalition's indecision was turning, like a great galactic ship finally aiming for a sensible course. It wasn't much, but it was a start. A start towards pulling Earth back from the brink and showing the galaxy just what humans were made of. After all, if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was defying the odds, even if that meant having to occasionally punch a space squid in the face, metaphorically speaking. With the coalition shifting its stance and Eliana's team working miracles back home, Rhinox knew they might just have a fighting chance. And as far as he was concerned, that was all he needed. For the first time in days, Rhinox allowed himself a small, hopeful smile. They weren't out of the woods yet, but at least now they could see a path through the trees. The Galactic Coalition Chamber, with its assortment of peculiar life forms and high-stakes galactic politics, was no place for the faint-hearted or the terminally sane. Ambassador Rhinox, who was neither, found himself standing in the metaphorical spotlight, the weight of Earth's fate pressing down on his shoulders like a particularly needy toddler. Unfortunately, he was also standing on the precipice of a betrayal he hadn't seen coming, a classic Tuesday in his world. The Vornaxian delegate, who had been a feathered ally in wit if not in deed, leaned in with an expression that could only be described as mischievous, or maybe just avian confusion. Ambassador, it seems the tides are not in your favor today. Rhinox, ever the optimist when it came to recognizing doom, shrugged. Story of my life. What's a little backstabbing among friends? He cast a glance around the chamber, noting the Zorvax representative's tentacle twitching in what could be excitement or a particularly intense itch. The Jorvian hegemon's representative, Mr. Cactus with a temper, had shifted its stance, literally and metaphorically. Ambassador Rhinox, we must reconsider our resources. Your planet's situation doesn't inspire confidence. Ah, the old I'm breaking up with you because of my personal growth routine, Rhinox muttered under his breath. Look, I get it. Earth's not the sexiest prospect right now. But there's more at stake than just resources. The Jorvian's spines bristled, and Rhinox wondered if he'd end up with one embedded in his back before the day was out. We cannot afford to bolster a failing venture. Failing venture. Have you ever tried a chocolate chip cookie? Rhinox shot back, refusing to let the situation get him down. Earth isn't just a failing venture, it's a variety show in progress. Sure, some acts are rubbish, but when it's good, it's damn good. The Vornaxian chuckled, or at least made a noise that could be interpreted as such if you were feeling particularly generous. Your humor is noted, Ambassador, but levity alone won't sway the coalition. Rhinox sighed, a sound filled with the kind of existential dread only a diplomat could truly appreciate. I know, but we've got potential. And I'd hate to see it go to waste because you all got cold feet. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Dr. Eliana Morrow stood amidst the chaos of her lab, which looked less like the beating heart of a scientific revolution and more like a junkyard on a particularly windy day. Her assistant had somehow managed to entangle himself in wires yet again, a feat that would have inspired awe if it weren't so depressingly predictable. Should I call the Guinness Book of Galactic Records for most unintentional bondage scenarios? Eliana asked, smirking as she helped him untangle. Hey, don't kink shame, he replied, finally free of the cables but still managing to look like he'd been through a war zone. Their cobbled-together device was emitting a series of worrying sputters, much like an over-caffeinated cat hacking up a hairball. Communication attempts with Rhinox were proving as reliable as a politician's promise. Anything? Eliana asked, more out of hope than expectation. Just static, her assistant said, tapping the console like it owed him money. The device, which they'd affectionately named the Cosmic Jester for reasons that were both obvious and questionable, had yet to deliver the comedic punchline they were hoping for. Instead, it seemed intent on producing a flop of galactic proportions. Eliana glanced at the monitor, her optimism waning. "We're on our own unless Rhinox can pull a rabbit out of his diplomatic hat. That bad, huh? Think of it this way," she said, her tone as dry as the Martian desert. "We're either going to save Earth or feature in the galaxy's most embarrassing obituary." As the Cosmic Jester continued its dubious performance, they were interrupted by a crackle over the speakers, an alien voice screeching through the interference. "Earth forces, cease your transmissions." Eliana's eyebrow arched and her assistant shot her a nervous glance. "Looks like someone noticed us." "Noticed us?" Eliana snorted. "We're practically the star attraction." "Do you think they want autographs?" "Depends," he replied, "on whether they plan on incinerating us first." Back in the Coalition chamber, Rhinox was doing his best impression of a man who hadn't just been handed a galactic-sized middle finger by his supposed allies. The Zorvax representative, sensing a shift in power, was now wielding its tentacles like an over-enthusiastic conductor. "Ambassador Rhinox," it gurgled, voice oozing with the kind of slimy superiority that made one long for a good disinfectant. "Perhaps you have overestimated your planet's value." Rhinox rolled his eyes, a gesture that was lost on the Zorvax but appreciated by the Vornaxian. "Overestimated, please. We're the underdogs everyone loves to root for." "That's a romantic notion," the Zorvax sneered, its tentacles flaring. "But romance is hardly a reliable currency." "Neither is cynicism, but it seems to pay your bills," Rhinox retorted, earning a feathered chuckle from the Vornaxian. The Jorvian, sensing an opportunity to pile onto an already sinking ship, added its voice to the chorus of doubt. "We must preserve our resources for ventures that promise tangible returns. Earth is an untenable gamble." Unpredictably, it was the Vornaxian who spoke up, its tone contemplative. "Yet, history has shown that the most significant discoveries often arise from the least expected sources." Rhinox seized on the lifeline like a drowning man reaching for a piece of driftwood. "Exactly. We're like a grab bag at a yard sale. Sure, you might get a dud, but you could also find treasure." "You're clinging to a dream, Rhinox," the Zorvax intoned, its voice now as cutting as a scalpel. "Better than clinging to despair," Rhinox shot back, though his bravado was beginning to fray at the edges. Even with the support of a few allies, the prevailing sentiment was clear. Earth was on its own, and Rhinox's career might be joining it in the galactic gutter. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but he'd down it with a swig of defiance. Back in the lab, Eliana was grappling with her own set of diminishing options. "All right, let's try rerouting the power through that external node," she suggested, pointing at a section of the machine that looked suspiciously like it was held together with duct tape and hope. "Great plan," her assistant replied, eyeing the node with suspicion. "If it doesn't blow up in our faces." "Don't jinx it," Eliana said, though if she was honest, her confidence was hanging by a thread thinner than the ones they were currently using to patch the equipment. The interference continued, the alien voice persistent, each word like nails on a chalkboard. "Cease. Transmissions. Violation." Eliana ignored it, a stubborn defiance that was probably more human than wise. "We keep trying," she declared. "If this works, it'll be worth pissing off a few extraterrestrial bureaucrats." Back at the Coalition chamber, Rhinox was leaning heavily on wit and sarcasm, his last lines of defense. "We might be the oddballs in the galactic neighborhood," he conceded to the room, "but who doesn't love an unpredictable neighbor?" The Jorvian skepticism was palpable, like a cold wind across a graveyard. "Your planet's unpredictability is precisely the problem, Ambassador." "Or its charm," Rhinox countered, though he was beginning to sound like a man trying to sell ice cubes in Antarctica. The Vornaxian, ever the cryptic ally, added, "Perhaps unpredictability is not a flaw but a potential for growth." "Thank you," Rhinox said, nodding to the bird-like delegate. "See, at least someone here understands the beauty of chaos." The Zorvax wasn't convinced, its posture one of triumph. "Ambassador Rhinox, your attempts are admirable but ultimately futile." Rhinox's laughter was bitter, like dark chocolate but with less satisfaction. "Maybe," he admitted, "but I'd rather go down swinging than sit in comfortable defeat." The coalition's indecision lingered, a palpable tension that no amount of humor could dispel. Yet even as he felt the sand shifting beneath him, Rhinox refused to concede, hoping against hope that somewhere, Aliana and her team were pulling off the impossible. In their lab, the cosmic jester stuttered into life, a flicker of success amidst a sea of failure. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife, and Aliana's heart pounded in time with the machine's erratic rhythm. "Come on," she whispered as if coaxing a stubborn child. "Give us something." The screen flickered, a garbled message forming from the chaos. It wasn't much, but it was a start, a lone candle in the encroaching dark. Aliana grinned, the expression fierce and defiant. "Looks like we're back in business," she said, adrenaline lending her voice a triumphant edge. "About time," her assistant replied, his relief palpable. Even as the alien interference loomed, Aliana knew they had a shot. A slim one, sure, but odds had never stopped humanity before. And as Rhinox battled political tides light years away, each fighting their own battles, she held onto that flicker of hope like a lifeline. Back in the coalition chamber, Rhinox straightened, a new resolve in his eyes. "You may not see it now," he told the assembly, "but Earth's story is far from over. You can either be a part of it or watch from the sidelines as we make history." The Vornaxian nodded, its feathered head bowing in acknowledgement. Perhaps there is merit in backing an unexpected victor. And with the Jorvian's silence a tacit agreement, Rhinox knew the game wasn't over, not yet. Earth was down, but not out. And with allies both feathered and human, it might just be enough to tip the scales. After all, what was life without a little chaos, a dash of insanity, and an enduring belief in the impossible? Rhinox had been in worse situations before, but they usually involved less bureaucracy and more firefights. The Galactic Coalition chamber was still as welcoming as an unwashed armpit, and the delegates continued to eye him like a pack of starving hyenas, contemplating a particularly scrawny antelope. As the debate droned on like a dying engine, a new sound pierced the air, an unexpected interruption that was as welcome as a surprise tax audit. It was the voice of the Vornaxian delegate, once again raising its melodious tones above the din. "Ambassador Rhinox," it said, wings fluttering slightly, "there may be those among us who wish to assist you in ways that might not be entirely orthodox." "Oh, this should be good," Rhinox muttered, his sarcasm as sharp as a stiletto. "Enlighten me." The Vornaxian's eyes twinkled with mischief. "A certain faction favorable to your cause possesses technology that could, theoretically, aid your predicament. Biopunk technology." Rhinox raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. "Biopunk sounds like something my grandmother warned me about." "It's unconventional," the Vornaxian admitted. "But then, desperate times, as your Earth saying goes." "Desperate measures, indeed," Rhinox said, nodding slowly. "What's the catch?" "Only that it's considered unsanctioned by official coalition standards," the Vornaxian replied with a winged shrug. "But then you humans have never been ones to shy from a little rule bending, or outright shattering," Rhinox added with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "All right, you've piqued my interest. Let's dance. Back on Earth, Doctor." Aliana Morrow and her assistant were knee-deep in what they generously termed the plan. The lab looked like it had been decorated by a madman with a penchant for electrical fires, wires, screens, and enough duct tape to hold together a small moon. "Any news from Rhinox?" Aliana asked, knowing full well there wasn't any. "Nothing yet," her assistant replied, his fingers flying over the keyboard like a caffeinated pianist. But I think the cosmic jesters finally decided to play nice. About time, Aliana muttered. Tell it we've got better things to do than babysit a prima donna piece of tech. The machine whirred, spat, and finally settled into a low hum, an improvement, albeit a minor one. Aliana crossed her fingers, which seemed a more reliable method of ensuring success than anything else they'd tried. As they worked, her assistant's console pinged. He leaned in, squinting at the message that blinked back at him. Aliana, you might want to take a look at this." She peered over his shoulder, her eyebrows climbing as she read. "That's interesting." "Interesting?" he echoed, incredulous. "Try batshit insane," Aliana chuckled. "Oh, come on, that's what makes it fun." The message was from the Vornaxian, relayed via Rhinox and encoded in a way that would have made a cryptographer cry. It detailed a plan, a radical, borderline reckless plan involving biopunk tech and a whole lot of wishful thinking. "Biopunk, huh?" her assistant mused, scratching his head. "Isn't that the stuff that's supposed to be illegal?" "Illegal is such a strong word," Aliana said, waving a hand dismissively. "I prefer creatively regulated." "Right," he said, nodding. "And I'm a creatively regulated genius." "That's the spirit," Aliana said, patting him on the back. "Now, let's see if we can pull this off without blowing ourselves to kingdom come." In the coalition chamber, Rhinox was attempting to juggle a dozen conversations at once, none of which seemed to be going in his favor. He'd long since stopped counting the number of times he'd been told no in a dozen different languages. But the Vornaxian's clandestine offer loomed large in his mind, a tantalizing possibility amidst a sea of dead ends. He knew it was a long shot, but then again, so was trying to communicate with a creature that resembled an angrier version of a houseplant. The Jorvian, ever the skeptic, eyed Rhinox with a mixture of suspicion and disdain. "You seem unusually buoyant, Ambassador." "Have you finally accepted the futility of your cause?" Rhinox grinned, though it felt more like baring his teeth. "Not quite, just pondering the merits of improvisation." "Improvisation is often a synonym for failure," the Jorvian pointed out, his words as prickly as his exterior. "True," Rhinox admitted. "But sometimes it's masquerading as brilliance," the Jorvian snorted, or whatever passed for snorting among its kind. "Your optimism is ill-placed. So's your cynicism," Rhinox shot back. "But isn't that what makes this job fun?" Ignoring the Jorvian's retort, Rhinox returned to the Vornaxian, who was watching the proceedings with a wry amusement. "You really think this biopunk business could work?" The Vornaxian's feathers ruffled slightly, a gesture that could have been a shrug. "If there's one thing I've learned, Ambassador, it's never to underestimate the resourcefulness of desperate people." "Then you've never met a desperate human," Rhinox replied dryly. "Quite the contrary," the Vornaxian said, its eyes gleaming. "It's precisely why I'm interested." Meanwhile, back on Earth, Aliana and her assistant were knee-deep in biopunk technology, which was proving to be as cooperative as a cat on bath day. The lab's state, a triumph of chaos over order, was only outmatched by the dubious nature of their endeavor. "So," Aliana said, her hands buried in the guts of the cosmic jester, "what's the worst that could happen?" Her assistant stared at her aghast. "You really want me to answer that?" "Not really," she admitted, grinning despite the odds. "But it's comforting to consider the possibilities." "Comforting isn't the word I'd use," he muttered, returning his focus to the task at hand. They worked in tandem, the hum of the machinery a constant companion as they coaxed and coerced the biopunk tech into doing something it was never designed to do. It was reckless, dangerous, and very possibly illegal. But then, so was trying to open a wormhole with nothing more than spit and imagination. "Any progress?" Aliana asked, not looking up from her work. "Some," her assistant replied. "If by progress you mean we haven't blown up yet." "Good enough for me," she said, adjusting a component with the care of a surgeon. "Let's see if we can keep it that way." Back in the coalition chamber, the debate had reached a fever pitch, the room a cacophony of voices and barely contained chaos. Rhinox, riding the fine line between diplomacy and desperation, stood his ground, bolstered by the Vornaxians' unorthodox support. "Ambassador Rhinox, this is madness," the Zorvax intoned, its tentacles twitching in disapproval. "Your refusal to accept reality is jeopardizing your planet." Rhinox chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Madness? Maybe. But when has that ever stopped us?" "Your optimism is misplaced, Ambassador," the Zorvax insisted, its voice as oily as ever. "Optimism is just realism in better lighting," Rhinox replied, undeterred. "And sometimes that's all you need." The Vornaxian chimed in, its tone as enigmatic as always. "Perhaps it is not optimism, but the awareness of potential." Rhinox shot it a grateful glance, clinging to the slender thread of hope like a man adrift at sea. "Exactly. Potential. That's what we've got. Just gotta figure out how to harness it before it explodes in our faces." In the lab, Aliana and her assistant were nearing the endgame, their progress a patchwork of trial, error, and blind luck. The cosmic jester was humming along, its displays flickering with a kind of manic energy that was both reassuring and terrifying. "All right," Aliana said, her voice a mix of excitement and trepidation. "Moment of truth." Her assistant nodded, sweat beading on his forehead. "Here goes nothing." With a deep breath, Aliana activated the biopunk tech, sending a surge of power through the cosmic jester. For a moment nothing happened, and then, like a reluctant engine sputtering to life, the machine roared into action. The lab vibrated with energy, monitors displaying data in a flurry of numbers and symbols that made less sense than a politician's promises. But amid the chaos, a single message broke through, clear and unmistakable. "We did it!" her assistant shouted, his relief palpable. Aliana allowed herself a brief moment of triumph, her smile wide and genuine. "Told you it'd work." Never underestimate the power of a good plan and a little insanity. Back in the coalition chamber, Rhinox's communicator buzzed, the sudden noise cutting through the din. He glanced at it, reading the message with a growing sense of disbelief and hope. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered, a grin spreading across his face. The Vornaxian, watching him with interest, tilted its head. "Good news, I presume." "More than good," Rhinox said, his voice buoyed by the unexpected success. "Seems like our little gamble paid off." The Zorvax, sensing a shift, glared at Rhinox with thinly veiled irritation. "This changes nothing, Ambassador." Rhinox met its gaze with a newfound confidence. "Oh, I think it changes quite a bit." With the wormhole reopening looming on the horizon, Earth still had a fighting chance. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was hope, tangible, real, and as unpredictable as the humans who'd forged it. As the coalition continued to argue and bicker, Rhinox knew one thing for certain. Against all odds, Earth wasn't out of the game yet. Not by a long shot. And sometimes, that was all you needed to tip the scales. Rhinox stood at the center of the Galactic Coalition chamber, a perverse juxtaposition of desperation and poise. It was the sort of place where optimism went to die, usually after being throttled by bureaucracy and devoured by cynicism. But today, Rhinox had a plan so crazy it just might work, or at least not fail spectacularly. A fine distinction, he thought. The Jorvian hegemon is representative, a walking cactus whose prickliness extended far beyond its verdant exterior, glared at him. "This scheme of yours, Ambassador," it said, voice like grinding sandpaper, "if successful, sets a dangerous precedent." "If," Rhinox echoed with a smile. "An important word." "Personally, I prefer when." The Zorvax representative, a creature resembling an ill-tempered squid caught in a particularly bad storm, waved a tentacle dismissively. "Humans and their boundless optimism, it will be your undoing." Rhinox shrugged. "Could be, but at least we'll go down swinging." "Beats sitting on our hands." The chamber erupted in a cacophony of alien languages, each delegate contributing their 2 cents, though Rhinox suspected some had more like $2 worth of complaints. His attention shifted to the Vornaxian delegate, who had been surprisingly supportive of this whole reckless endeavor. Its feathers shimmered slightly, a silent cue of anticipation. "Ambassador Rhinox," the Vornaxian said, its voice carrying over the din, "is Earth truly prepared for the ramifications of reopening the wormhole?" Rhinox considered this, then nodded. "Prepared is a stretch. More like we've got duct tape and a hell of a lot of hope, but that's never stopped us before. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Doctor." Eliana Morrow surveyed her lab with the calculated gaze of a commander assessing the battlefield. The cosmic jester hummed ominously, its biopunk innards a Frankenstein-esque blend of sanctioned tech and creatively regulated components. "All right," Eliana said, her tone brisk, "we're at the point of no return. If anyone needs to make peace with their god or any other celestial entity, now's the time." Her assistant, eyes glued to his console, snorted. "I'm more worried about making peace with my landlord if this goes south." "Fair point," Eliana conceded. "But if we succeed, rent's the least of our worries. The party invitations will be flooding in. Assuming we don't end up on some intergalactic watch list," her assistant quipped. "Minor detail," Eliana replied with a smirk. "Let's focus on the upside." Back in the Coalition chamber, the debate raged. But Rhinox, buoyed by Eliana's message of progress, held firm, ready to gamble everything on Earth's last-ditch effort. He watched as the Zorvax representative continued to spout pessimism, its tentacles twitching with irritation. "Ambassador," the Zorvax droned, "surely you realize the improbability of your plan's success." "Improbable doesn't mean impossible," Rhinox shot back. "Just means more fun when it works." "You are incorrigible," the Zorvax sighed. Rhinox grinned, unrepentant. "Thanks, I try." As the Coalition's murmurs swirled around him, Rhinox's communicator buzzed again. He glanced at the message, his heart leaping at the update. The window was closing fast, but if they moved quickly, they could still pull off the impossible. "Looks like we're on track," Rhinox announced, his voice carrying a note of triumph. "Time for the grand finale." The Vornaxian's eyes gleamed with interest. "You relish in dangerous gambits, Ambassador." "Part of the job description," Rhinox replied. "Right under tolerate alien bureaucracy and keep a straight face while doing it." Back at the lab, Eliana and her assistant were in the final stages of their risky operation. The cosmic jester glowed with an eerie luminescence, data streams racing across its screens like panicked ants. "Initiating final sequence," Eliana said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Her assistant nodded, fingers flying across the keyboard. "Here goes nothing." Eliana flipped the final switch, and the room was immediately bathed in a pulsing light. The biopunk tech roared to life, electricity crackling through the air with barely restrained fury. It was a spectacle of chaos and control, a testament to human ingenuity, or insanity depending on your perspective. "Hold it steady," Eliana shouted over the noise, adjusting a dial with the precision of a bomb diffuser. The cosmic jester whirred and clanked, each sound another note in a symphony of mechanical madness. For a moment, time stretched thin, and then, with a final shuddering gasp, the machine went silent. The lab fell into an expectant hush, the air thick with anticipation. Then the main screen flickered and a new message appeared: "Wormhole established." Eliana let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "We did it," she said, more to herself than anyone else. Her assistant slumped in his chair, a mix of relief and disbelief on his face. "I can't believe it actually worked." "Believe it," Eliana replied, her grin wide. "Now let's hope the Coalition's watching," and watch they were. Back in the chamber, Rhinox stood before the representatives, a new confidence in his posture. His communicator beeped, displaying the success of their endeavor for all to see. "Ambassador Rhinox, Mr. Cactus," the Jorvian representative began reluctantly, "it appears you've done the impossible." Rhinox held his hands up in mock surrender. "Guilty as charged, but in our defense nobody told us it couldn't be done." The Zorvax, less thrilled, glared at him through narrowed eyes. "This doesn't change the fact that Earth remains a risk." "Oh, I know," Rhinox replied, his grin never faltering. "But it does mean we're a risk worth taking." The coalition, begrudgingly, had to acknowledge Earth's resilience. The wormhole's reopening was a testament to humanity's knack for turning the tables, for refusing to accept defeat even when the odds were stacked higher than a politician's promises. As the chamber buzzed with renewed debate, Rhinox allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. Earth wasn't just a rock in space, isolated and forgotten. It was a player in the cosmic game, and while the rules might be rigged, humans had never been ones to play by the rules anyway. The Vornaxian turned to Rhinox, its expression unreadable but its tone decidedly impressed. "You humans never cease to surprise. That's what we do best," Rhinox replied, watching as the coalition slowly came to terms with this new reality. Back on Earth, Aliana and her team celebrated their improbable victory, though the specter of what lay ahead loomed large. But for now, there was joy in the lab, the kind that came from snatching success from the jaws of near-certain failure. "So what now?" her assistant asked, raising a glass in a toast. "Now," Aliana echoed, clinking her glass against his. "We hold on tight and see where this wild ride takes us." In the coalition chamber, Rhinox remained at the heart of the storm, a cynic's smile on his lips as he prepared for the next round of negotiations. But with the wormhole open and Earth back in the game, he knew they had a fighting chance. And sometimes, that was all you needed. "Here's to the impossible," Rhinox murmured to himself, knowing full well that for humans, impossible was just another word for opportunity. Ambassador Rhinox stood in the Galactic Coalition chamber with a grin as wide as a snake oil salesman. He looked around at the gathered representatives, a menagerie of bizarre life forms that could double as a zoo from someone's nightmares, if that someone was an acid-tripping artist with a knack for chaos. Yet here they were, the galaxy's elite, arguing over humanity's right to exist. "Looks like we've done it," Rhinox said, unable to keep the smug satisfaction from creeping into his voice. "The wormhole's open, the champagne's on ice, and Earth is back in the game, ready to talk about better seating arrangements." The Jorvian hegemony representative bristled, its cactus-like spines rattling with irritation. "Your species has a knack for reckless behavior," it said, voice as dry and scratchy as its exterior. "This does not guarantee you a place of prominence." Spoken like someone who's never had a bad hair day, Rhinox quipped, earning a few snickers from nearby delegates. "But it does mean we're not going anywhere. Which means, dear prickly friend, that your options are limited to working with us or claiming the galaxy's worst case of diplomatic alopecia." The chamber buzzed with debate, but the tone was shifting. Earth's isolation was no longer an inevitability but a choice the galaxy might not afford. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Dr. Aliana Morrow lounged in her lab's cluttered chaos, a space that looked like a tech hoarder's fever dream. Empty coffee cups mingled with high-tech equipment, and the cosmic jester hummed softly, as if it knew it was the star of this absurd show. Her assistant, still basking in the afterglow of improbable success, sprawled in his chair, eyes barely open. "So do we get medals for this or just a slightly larger coffee budget? Why not both?" Aliana replied, swirling the last sip of her drink. "I hear caffeine's the fuel of champions. Maybe we should consider a side hustle," he suggested. "Wormhole consultants. I'll even get business cards." Aliana chuckled, though her mind was already wandering to the implications of what they'd achieved. Earth was back on the map, and with that came all the opportunities and baggage of galactic attention. In the coalition chamber, the Vornaxian delegate approached Rhinox, its feathers shimmering like oil on water. "Your tenacity is remarkable, Ambassador." "Earth's actions today have altered the dynamics." Rhinox shrugged, the picture of nonchalance. "We're full of surprises. Just when you think you've got us measured, we go and change the scale. The Vornaxian Commonwealth is interested in collaborative ventures," it continued, hinting at an olive branch with undertones of self-interest. "Your technology intrigues us. I knew our duct tape and dream strategy would pay off. But let's keep this under the radar. I'd hate for people to think we're actually competent." Elsewhere in the chamber, the Zorvax representative sulked, its tentacles drooping like a deflated balloon animal. This outcome is not to our advantage. Can't win 'em all, Rhinox replied, grinning like a shark with a secret stash of chum. But you can try, which is what makes this fun. The coalition was a buzz of discussion, agreement, and thinly veiled threats, but for once, the future looked a little less grim for Earth. It wasn't every day you reopened a wormhole and rewrote the rules of galactic diplomacy all before lunch. Back on Earth, Aliana and her assistant took a well-earned break. She gazed out the window, watching the sun set over a world that no longer felt so alone in the universe. Think we'll finally get that intergalactic pizza delivery service, her assistant laughed. Only if we can afford the tip. Guess we'll have to keep impressing the galaxy then, she said with a wink. Until they realize we're just making it up as we go along. And wasn't that the truth? In the grand cosmic game, Earth was the underdog with a stubborn streak a mile wide. But now, with allies and a reopened wormhole, the galaxy was their oyster, or at the very least, their slightly dubious clam. In the coalition chamber, Rhinox wrapped up negotiations with a flourish, securing Earth's place not just as a participant, but as a player who'd earned a seat at the table. It wasn't a perfect solution, but then perfection was overrated. He'd take a messy, scrappy victory any day. As he left the chamber, Rhinox's thoughts turned to the future. There were still plenty of battles ahead, plenty of negotiations to navigate, but Earth had carved out a niche. They were in the game, and sometimes that was all you needed to change the rules. Here's to the unexpected, he murmured to himself, raising a metaphorical glass to all the times humanity had beaten the odds, and to making it up as we go along. Back on Earth, Aliana and her team celebrated with a small, rowdy party, a testament to their shared relief and the ridiculousness of the situation. It wasn't every day you defied the galaxy's expectations and lived to tell the tale. So what's next? Her assistant asked, a gleam in his eye. Next, Aliana echoed, considering the vast possibilities. We see how far we can push this, and maybe, just maybe, we make a little history along the way. In the coalition chamber, Rhinox prepared for his next meeting with a grin and a plan. Earth's place was secure, its future uncertain but promising. As long as they kept defying expectations and surprising the galaxy, there was hope. And really, what more could you ask for in a universe full of cynics, bureaucrats, and alien squids with dubious intentions? In the end, it was exactly what humanity was good at. Surviving against the odds, thriving in chaos, and grabbing opportunity by the throat, even when it came wrapped in a cosmic tentacle or two. With a laugh, Rhinox stepped back into the fray, ready for whatever the galaxy had to throw at him next. Because if there was one thing he knew for certain, it was this: Earth wasn't out of the game. Not by a long shot. And sometimes that was all you needed to change the universe, or at least give it a run for its money.